Hello adventurers, and welcome to this final part in the three-part mini-series where we make Juvenile Mimics as well as an assortment of terrain for your tabletop roleplay sessions, specifically the Dungeons & Dragons Adventurer magazine adventures. Now, this is a two-part episode where we're going to be making both a statue as well as a rusted pile of armour. Now for statues, it's real simple, and anyone can do this, but you mainly need two of the same model. Now in this case I'm using a DC HeroClix miniature of a Zamoron, which are these strange like alien Green Lantern-esque beings, right? In the Adventurer it says the statue is like a tall, beautiful elven woman. Well, I don't know about beautiful, but this is certainly tall and female, and I've got tons of these, so making a statue seems to be the logical choice. Statues themselves, super easy to build. As you can see, I've just used some doubled up chipboard, which is the particle board you get at the back of a legal pad, thick cardboard, right? Cut into squares. And to actually turn this into a mimic, as opposed to just the statue, it's the same process, getting it off the HeroClix base, just cut it off with a craft knife, and then using a pair of clippers just go around the edges and just straighten those up, because HeroClix, for whatever reason, they always seem to have this cast tab that the models stand on. The old ones, it used to just be little circles by the feet, but on the newer ones it tends to be just a big kidney bean shape, which isn't very organic when it comes to statues or architecture, which tends to be more straight lines. And after you've clipped that with a pair of pliers or a pair of snips, just go around with a craft knife to straighten up the edges. Now for the mimic, the choice here is I could just glue this to the base and that would be fine. However, the proportions aren't really particularly monstrous, are they? It's just a very static, tall, standing up figure. Great for a statue, not so great for a menacing creature. So the easiest way to change that is to just take your craft knife and start cutting bits out. Now I like the idea that the mimic, which as we know is just teeth, tongue and eyes, I like the idea that it's got this mouth where the stomach would be, similar to how the treasure chest mimics or the wardrobe ones open up to this great big maw that's going to try and grab you and bite into you. So by removing the torso and angling the arms, I've created the suggestion of an opening. Tilting the head to the side, you'll see why a bit later on. Now tongues, again, just like in the Torch Mimic episode, I'm just using a piece of card to a tongue-like shape and then curving it, again using super glue to stiffen it so that it's nice and hard when it comes to painting, and for durability on the tabletop, we're just gluing that in place. So now we get into the fun task really of green stuffing. So similar to the previous episode when we did the chandelier, we're starting with the teeth, right? And we're not using cocktail sticks or anything like that for this. We're going to use green stuff, and we're going to use a very tiny amount, and we're going to roll it into a little cone before using a tool to squish that, to connect that to the body. So let's start with this upper tooth, as it were. And as you can see, I'm just using the spearhead tip of the blade to just push that onto the model. Now this is fiddly. This is the fiddliest work you will do, okay? No one said custom modeling monsters was easy, right? And by this point, hopefully you'll see that the results ultimately, so long as you stick with it, so long as you work through how frustrating it can be, really are worth it. And you can create monsters, you can create models that are incredibly unique and personal to you. So just by pushing it and bending it, before you know it, I've got this tooth-like growth coming out of the chest of this statue. Alongside, as you can see at the bottom of the hands, I've made it look like almost like mandibles, where it's not just a mouth, it's actually coming down and out to the sides with more teeth along the edges ready to grab you once the tongue's pulled you in. I do apologise if I knock the camera at any point during the video. The joys of a small work area. But again, it's just going round the model with your craft knife with green stuff and just gently putting these in one at a time. Start in the middle and work your way out to the sides. If you try and work from the outside in, as it were, so from like the molars at the sides of your mouth all the way to the inside. By the time you get to that final tooth, you haven't got much room to negotiate with your fingers. So as you can see, I cut the head and mounted it to the side so I could have these eyeball-like growths coming out, because ultimately this is a shape-shifted mimic that's been hiding and masquerading as a statue, and those eyeballs, they've been there the whole time. It's just now they're actually able to sort of pop out and get you. But you can see compared to the statue, and you can see compared to this hapless adventurer, that the scale fits quite nicely. I think if I was to go back and change this now, I might make the actual statue a little bit thicker because it's quite thin at the back, but that's about it. And besides touching up the base, really that's it, you're done. So moving on to the rusted pile of armour that's actually a juvenile mimic in disguise. Making little suits of armour is nice and easy. I've used these Mantic War Games Kings of War High Elves miniatures because they're nice and cheap and you get lots of them. And there's some lovely bits on these Mantic sprues. Can we just shout out like all the extra little fiddly details, like this slain elf and this wonderful little tiger cub or lion cub. But all you need to do really to make a pile of armour is just chop up a person, take away the connection, so the knees, the elbows, the face of course in the helmet, and any hair or anything that's there, cut it into a little pile and glue it together. Now let's actually focus on making the armor mimic, as it were. So I've taken this high elf and I've snipped the shield off, and whenever you do remove something that's been molded onto the body, chances are you're going to need to do something to cover over that, because it's just going to be rough, jagged plastic edges that, you know, no matter how good you paint them, are going to look rough. So I've gone over those areas with my craft knife here, and the plan is this is the side where the actual mimic's mouth and its eye is as it looks at you, and the tongue that comes out to try and get you. So mounting that to the base, nice and easy. Just a couple of drops of super glue and that's on there. The whole thing with making custom monsters is treat them as you would any miniature in your collection. Go around, remove mold lines, smooth surfaces, add battle damage, add texture, pose them like you would a miniature. Just because this stuff is cheap or just because it's being done on a budget doesn't mean that you can't treat it nicely. But let's actually start to make this look like a mimic. So as I said in my previous video, whenever you do some green stuff work and you have some leftover modeling putty, roll it up into little worms, because that's what I'm using here, both to represent the fact that this is a shapeshifter with the right arm, as it were, coming out as a little tentacle, a little tendril to try and trip up your leg or wrap around your sword arm, but also the larger tongue that's coming out of the mouth on the side. Now this one I'm going for a closed mouth look, similar to when I did the torch mimic. So that sort of leech-like minnow face that's just a ray of teeth all bared at you. And I'm going around with that same little needle nose tool, just making simple little indents that create these wonderful little triangles, which when you do a little bit of cleanup work around them, can make wonderful fangs, wonderful bared fangs. And it is just as simple as working clockwise around the model and making little triangles before then going around the outside and actually adding a little bit of texture there to make it look like they're inset into the gums. So I thought, so far I've not actually showed you any of the painting process, so why don't we change that? Starting with the statue mimic, because painting statues, and I will always recommend this, if you're painting a mimic, paint the piece of terrain that it hides as and the mimic at the same time, because the different colours that you use on the terrain will show up in the mimic as it's transforming back into its monstrous proto-ooze-like shapeshifter shape, right? But painting statues is the easiest thing. Base coat black, I base coat all my models in black. A dry brush of grey, a solid grey which is thickly applied before a much lighter grey over the top. Not white, we're going to do white a bit later on. But what we are picking out is all of the raised surfaces, all of the edges, And then over the top of the whole thing, a wash of Norn oil, that classic liquid talent that we all know and love, just to pick out all the recesses and all those shadowy nooks and crevices, which really, when you look at it as when it's done, by itself is pretty good. It's pretty good. I mean, on the actual statue, there's more that we could do here. There's more we could do to touch this up to improve this model. So this is where the dry brush of white comes into effect. And you only need, dry brushing is not that hard a technique. You only need a little bit of paint, but you have to saturate it into the bristles and then dry it off on a piece of paper, a bit of tissue paper on the newspaper that you've put down to paint your models on. And whenever you're dry brushing, I know there's a massive movement at the moment for people to have a dry brushing palette that they sort of get a bit of the excess off the brush first. One of the things you can do is dry brush at the back of the model first. Start at the back, the least likely place you're going to look when you first pick up a model, because typically we look at the front, we look at the face, the hands, the weapons, we look straight on at a model. We don't start with a model that a friend has handed to us by looking at the back, at the bum, at the legs, right? So another step to make statues stand out a bit more is adding extra little details, adding, in this case, little brass, little bronze touches that make it look a little bit more ornate and a little bit more kind of visually interesting, and helps again to tie it into the mimic, because if this was just a plain grey statue, that would be fine, that would be absolutely fine, but it would be kind of basic, and we want to push ourselves, we want to change things. So once you've actually painted all the things on your mimic that tie into the terrain, the next step is to paint the tongue. And we are painting the tongue first. We're not painting the teeth, we're not painting the eyes, we're not doing any of that. We are painting the tongue first, because trying to get that red into those tight areas around the teeth later on, it's going to be so hard to not get it on the teeth or on the pink flesh of the mimic. Speaking of which, that's what we're looking at now. So, painting a mimic that is half transforming out of its camouflage, as it were. So I like my mimics to be relatively pink. I find that to be a good supernatural sort of, unmistakably monster colour, isn't it? It's a little bit Cronenberg. It's a little bit flesh monster coming to get you. So a solid base colour of, I believe I've used Screamer Pink here, on all the areas that are going to be that sort of flesh. So all around the gums and eyelids and things like that. And then we're going to start lightening it and doing gradual layer by layer. Now, I'm not here to tell you that you need to do 50 layers of highlights. 2 or 3 would be fine. And we've already effectively done one, because just this step here, we are like just elevating all of these raised areas. And you don't have to catch everything, but see where the dry brushing on the statue with that white, follow that up, copy that with the pink, because what that helps to do is sell this illusion as believable. So I'm using Flayed 1 Flesh to paint the teeth, but you could use any beige or bleached bone colour here. It would work absolutely fine. And honestly, painting teeth, it's not that hard once you get your head around it. Similar to a lot of this stuff, you can do one layer and be done, right? So a layer of Agrax Earthshade over all of the fleshy areas, being careful not to get it on the statue parts, just for the pure sake of it's quite a warm wash, and it can turn that quite nice cold grey stone effect into quite a warm looking off-white beige colour, and we don't want that. We don't want that at all. And once that's dried, we're going to do a second highlight now with the pink around all of the flesh areas again. So again, the eyelids, certain parts of the statue, certain parts around the chest, the gums, because ultimately it makes it believable as something that is fluid and moving. Because whenever you paint something to look like stone or rusted metal, it doesn't really have that sense of it's coming to get you because it's alive. It feels more like a statue or a solid inanimate object, which is what we don't want. Some simple highlights on the teeth using bone, and we're pretty much there. I mean, don't get me wrong. Things like the base, super easy. We'll just do brown with a beige dry brush over the top. Not a problem. But the tongue, again, we're going to use some Mephiston red as highlights along the tongue. Towards the end, I like to mix a little bit of orange in just for the tip of the tongue and maybe some of the edges, but not too much because we don't want this to look orange. We want it to still look like a blood red tongue. Painting eyes on my mimics, I like to do them bleached white and then do a yellow wash over the top because this adds a sort of otherworldly fisheye kind of look to them, but at the same time it pops right out of the model, and considering just how bulbous these eyes are, it's kind of fitting. But before you know it, you've got your perfectly innocent looking statue of an elven queen from a bygone era, which, you know, as a craft, you can do this. Statue building is by far, bar none, one of the easiest crafts you can do. But in this case, this elven statue holds a deadly secret, and that is that it is in fact one of the larger of the juvenile mimics of this cave system that they have crawled themselves into. Now, I do paint the little slitted dinosaur-like eyes using a little bit of black paint. It gives them a cartoony look, but honestly, with Dungeons & Dragons, that's fine. If you wanted to keep these looking more horrific and more body horror, just skip that step, or just leave the eyes white. You know, you don't have to follow these tutorials to the letter. Speaking of which, so painting rusted suits of armor. So as opposed to the statue where we didn't do a brown undercoat, here we are. And it is so easy to paint rusted metal, it is absurd. So brown, do a dark wash over the top of that, and then using a bright orange, just start stippling paint all over in a random pattern. Because rust does not settle in a nice ordered fashion. Rust is random, and rusted armor that has been worn down by time, that is chipped, that is flaking, that is breaking apart in your hands, using some metal paint you can just dab that all over and it just adds to the effect tenfold. Little rusted armor pieces of scenery are super easy, and again, just like the statue, you could do this. You could do this in an afternoon. It takes no time at all. And then again, just following all the steps that I did with painting the statue mimic, it's the same steps on all of the previous mimics. Paint him up, and before you know it, that rusted suit of armor is actually another feral monster coming to get you. You thought that magically enchanted amulet, you could just pick that up and walk away with it. Well, it turns out it was guarded. So there you have it, Adventurer. The last part of this 3-part series. And honestly, I hope you found these videos useful, because the actual terrain building side of it, they're little things that sometimes it's everywhere. Statue building, one of the oldest tricks in the book, we all know how to do it. But building chandeliers and building torch wall ensconces that are quick and easy, or building rusted piles of armor, you don't see that many tutorials on the subject, especially not in all the cases here of turning them into mimics. Speaking of which, you can take everything over the last 3 videos, you can take all the ideas here, the fact that mimics are just teeth and tongue and eyes, and you can apply that to anything. You can turn all manner of different bits of scenery into a mimic for your adventures, whether it's the full-grown treasure chest size mimic that can really challenge a party, or if it's like the little juvenile mimics that you've seen here, or even some of the big super colossal like house size mimics that you get out in the wilderness. You know, I hope you've enjoyed these videos. I've had a great time. I've had a blast putting these together, and honestly I want to see what you guys can come up with, because I feel like this is an area of Dungeons and Dragons adventuring that we just don't touch on, because mimics can take the form of anything. So, you know, who knows? That magic sword you find, that could be a mimic. That magical amulet that you've just slipped around your neck, well, I hope that's not a mimic. Even that campfire that you're about to light and sit down next to, now that you've taken off your armor and dropped your sword, well, Let's hope that's not a mimic in disguise. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and I'll see you all in the next episode. Goodbye.